Hi, I'm Chris, Interaction Designer on the Android Developer Tools team. This is the third episode in our mini-series of building Shrine and Jetpack Compose. Today we're going to be covering animations, which is one of my favorite parts of designing apps. If you missed the first couple episodes, be sure to check the show notes for the link. Alright, so let's get started in episode 3 with adding animations. So to review what we're going to do today, we're going to go back to the GitHub repository. And here I've outlined what we will cover in this episode. So for episode 3, and just so for people to remember, you can always see the different branches here that I have on GitHub. And also, I don't have part 3 tagged right now, but I will, once we're finished with this recording. So part 2 and part 1 are there if you want to jump to those as well to refresh your memory. So in episode 3, we are going to cover kind of an intro to animation. I alluded to it a bit last time, but we ran out of time in episode 2. So these are what we're going to cover. There's several different ways to do animation in Compose, but we're only going to cover a couple. We're going to cover the animation inspector, which helps with helps you debug your animation. And specifically, what are we going to animate? So the backdrop we built last time, which had a top app bar and it had a menu. And so we're going to actually animate those two things today with these APIs that I mentioned before. So let's get right into it. So what does the motion look like that we're going to animate? So this link is available in the repository. But if you go to the material design site, Shrine actually has broken out all the different aspects of the design. So at the very bottom, there's motion. And so in motion, there's a couple interesting effects that the Shrine app has. The launch screen is really interesting. I think this is like a splash screen. We're not going to build this, but maybe in a future episode we will. The thing we're going to focus on is really, I think it's covered in this navigation transition section, right? So I'll play this video. So yeah, if I slow it down, it's really this animation where, if we go back, it's the showing and hiding of that backdrop menu. More specifically, we actually have the direct motion spec for this. And so let me hide this first. And so here, if this works, oh no, I'll have to refresh the page. Always have to do this every once in a while. So this is actually going to show us the exact timings of the animation and which elements move. So here, if I play, it will do that kind of reveal of the backdrop. And kind of loop it, and if we can slow it down a bit, so you can see here it goes down, and then these navigation items kind of fade in a staggering way, and you can kind of see they're staggering here. Looking at the motion graph, you can see that each of them are kind of fading in. One after the other in a staggered motion. And then there's kind of an opposite animation when the backdrop will close. And so here, this is the backdrop closing animation. I'll slow it down and loop it so we can look at it. And here, there's less of a staggering. It's more like, I think the menu just disappears, and then that top bar, actually, I'll pause it. So we can actually scrub through this, which is really nice with this spec. You can see as I scrub through, the search Shrine input field kind of moves to the right, the diamond moves to the right all at the same time, and then that logo, the little menu logo, kind of comes back in, and the Shrine text thing comes back in. So that's kind of the backdrop close animation with the menu, with the menu items disappearing, and then with the open, it's kind of the reverse, where the Shrine text and the menu icon, all the icons will kind of move to the left, and then the text field will kind of animate in to the left as well, and then the backdrop menu items will fade in as the backdrop is opening. So it's actually a pretty complex animation, and hopefully we can walk through it in the simplest way possible today in code. All right. The other thing that is a useful resource as you're doing this is there's an entire guide on animation for Compose. This walks you through the different types of ways to do animation in Compose. We're not going to cover all of them. I think the only 3 we're going to cover is one that is called Update Transition. We're going to cover animated visibility and animated content. But I do encourage you to check this out because there are many ways to do animation, and depending on what your use case is, there is kind of an API you can reach for. But we'll kind of see how we use the three that I mentioned in the context of this shrine animation that we're trying to do. All right, so let's jump into Studio. I think one thing before we get to the actual animation part, I've made a few changes to the project from part 2. So one of the things I've done is, let me open it. I've updated some things in Gradle for the dependencies. So I think in previous streams we were using Compose 1.0.0, which is the stable version. I decided to use 1.1 beta 2. This is out now, and I think we're actually at beta 3 or 4 now. The reason for this, though, is because using this version in Android Studio will actually allow us to use some of the animation tooling that is coming up in the next release for Chipmunk. Because it's as I'll walk you through today, it's a really powerful tool to help you really fine-tune the animations, and we're really excited for people to try it because up until now it's been hard to use tools to really debug and kind of fine-tune the animations as before. We also had to make a few other adjustments. Gradle, I updated to 7.0.3. This is not necessary. You can actually leave it at 7.0 if you want. But the Kotlin Gradle plugin does have to be updated to 3.1, 1.5.31 to be exact. And if you don't do it, it will yell at you when you try to compile because it will say Compose Beta 2 requires this. So it will make you do it anyway if you forget to do it. The other change is I've upgraded the target SDK to 31. This is more because hopefully at some point I will deploy the animation that we're building to my phone. I have a Pixel 6 Pro here, and this is just required to deploy it to that phone. And then the other thing is we're building this backdrop, and this backdrop will actually be the first screen on the app. So these are a few minor changes that I've made, which will be on the GitHub repository, but I thought I'd set it up before we did the stream because we don't need to walk through it. Or walk through me coding. All right, so those are the changes I made. There are some other setup changes I made, or cleanup, I would say, in the project. On the backdrop, I cleaned up kind of how the code is organized. So I have like 3 previews here to allow you to kind of see the different components that make up the backdrop. So there is the backdrop itself, which has that back layer and front layer that we covered last time. And then within those, there is the navigation menu, which is on the back layer with the active selection. And then there's the top app bar. And here is this is kind of a neat feature preview because it's real code. You can actually simulate the different states. So I think if I go to Shrine Top App Bar Preview, I have 2 instances of the top app bar, and one is with the backdrop revealed and one is with it not revealed. And so you can see the 2 different visual states here, which is nice when you're testing your components just to make sure that they look right in the right state, which was hard to do before with XML. And so to walk you through it, so we talked about interactive preview before. It's a really helpful tool that you can use to test your UI without having to deploy it to a device. So I'll run that here on this backdrop preview. And so when I click this, the backdrop opens, and then you see the menu, and then the top app bar transitions to a different state. And then when I click it again, it goes back. But you'll notice there's no animation. It kind of the only animation is the backdrop moving down. And so that's the only animation we have, and that's built into the backdrop, but everything else kind of just immediately changes, which is a little jarring. And so we really want to make that smooth kind of to the design spec that I was reviewing before. And so how do we do that? So let's see, what should be the first one we cover? I think the first we should cover is this top app bar. All right, so we want to change this so that the diamond moves to the left and this shrine icon moves to the left, and then the shrine text moves to the left and fades out. And then we want the search field to fade in. So let's first work on the icons moving. I think that's the easiest thing to start with. All right, so if we go to the Shrine Top App Bar, here's the code itself. And you can see here I said if the backdrop is revealed, show the icon, which is the menu navigation icon. If not, don't show it. And then the shrine logo, this diamond, is always there, but it has a little check where it's offset. So if the backdrop is not revealed, then the offset is 20 dp, which is why it's kind of a little bit in and next to the icon, to the menu icon. And then if it's not, it's 0, which is why it's all the way to the left. But it's not animated, so let's animate them. So the first animation API we're going to cover is animated visibility. And this is super handy. The idea of animated visibility is basically it will animate, there's an enter and exit transition for an animation, and it's based on if something is visible or not. So that actually works really well with the backdrop, or sorry, with the menu icon, because here we're basically saying if the backdrop is revealed, then show it. So we're saying if the backdrop is visible, then let's show the menu navigation icon. But we actually want to animate it in. So I'm going to take this same thing here and just copy paste it into visible. And then I don't need this code anymore. I'm going to move icon up into here. And so without changing anything, just adding animated visibility with is visible. Let's test it out. So I might take a second to build. Oh. Okay. That's fine. Oh, okay. It broke. These things happen when you do things live. Let me close main activity and build compose because we don't need those. All right. All right, it's rebuilding. Great. So now when I enter interactive preview, oh, one sec. All right, so when I tap this, what should happen is the menu navigation icon just disappears. Yeah, so you see it kind of disappeared and then it reappears. And it's a little weird. So this is where the animation inspector comes in handy. So what we do in Android Studio is if we detect that a composable within a preview is using specific animation APIs, we'll actually show this little icon here. So if you hover over, it says this starts the animation inspection. So currently, this tool only supports update transition and animated visibility, but that's actually okay because those two APIs themselves can get you pretty far, as you'll see in this demo. So I'll turn that on. And what you'll see is at the bottom, there is this graph. So this graph actually shows you how the animation is going to play. So it shows you the easing curve of like how the values change over time. It also lets you slow it down. So here we'll just play it at 1x, which is really fast. And you're like, okay, I didn't really see what that effect looked like. So I can loop it. And so you can kind of loop it there. You can slow it down. So I'm going to slow it down to 0.1 just to make the effect. So this is what's happening by default when we're transitioning the visibility of this icon. It's kind of shrinking and fading to the left, which is kind of weird because that's not exactly the effect we want based on the spec. Also, so you can scrub through it too, so you can see exactly how it moves, which is great. This, for designers who are used to After Effects, this is very similar in terms of the interaction. It allows you to really fine tune these things and see at which specific, we don't have keyframes necessarily, but at which specific timestamp the thing is changing. So the reason that effect is happening is because the default transitions for animated visibility are these. So if you don't specify an enter transition, it will be a fade in plus an expand in, and then the exit one will be a shrink out and fade out, which is kind of what you saw there. Each of these effects also have their own defaults. So if you click fade in, the animation spec for fade in is a spring effect by default. We can change that to a tweens if we want to specify exactly the duration and the delay and the easing. But spring is what is used by default. And the same with expand in. So expand in has a spring. So I think what's also useful is I mentioned that animation guide on developer.android.com. So this actually shows you in a funny cat picture exactly how each of these transitions work. Just showing you the differences. So you can see the difference between like a slide in versus a scale in versus an expand in. But this kind of helps you get started to better understand how these APIs work. But I think it's always useful to use it in practice just to see. So what we want to do is actually customize this, because the effect that I was showing you before, this is not the effect we want. We actually want it to just slide to the left and then fade out. So what we'll do is we'll say enter transition is actually fade in plus slide in horizontally. And then the exit is we want it to fade out and then slide out horizontally. What's going on? Oh, we've got to import these statements. I'll stop the animation inspector. All right, come on. Oh, things are moving real slow. Okay. Oh no, that's not what I wanted to do. Oh, fade out. There we go. Come on. Let's go. Okay, cool. So now I can build and refresh. Some of this, I think, is moving really slow because the CPU is being taxed pretty hard on this machine. Because I'm recording the screen on a MacBook, on the native MacBook display, and running Android Studio at the same time. So if it seems slow, this is not how slow it should be in normal circumstances. But as you can see, when I did click that, it did a fade in and slide in, and then a fade out and slide out. And that's the effect we want, but we want to actually dial in it a little bit more. So I've actually done the fine tuning before, so I'm just going to copy paste some snippets that I had previously. And so let me just make sure I'm on the right branch. So it's really, episode 3. Yep, there we go. Cool. All right, so let me find, yes, here's the, I'll just close that. Yep, here's the navigation visibility. I wonder if I can increase the font size here. VS Code. Okay. Yeah, I'm using VS Code just because it's a faster text editor to just copy paste things from. But you can always use Studio, of course. And the syntax highlighting is not great for Kotlin, as you can see. But so this is the exact duration that I want for fade in. So I'm just going to copy paste these just because it's faster to copy paste this and then explain it. Copy. All right. Cool. And then there's going to be some warnings. Probably. Yep. So tween we'll have to import. And then linear easing we'll have to import. And then round to pixel we will have to import. Oh, density. Yes. There is a density line here. So density, this is important in the case of when you're dealing with positioning, because DPs and pixels are different in Android. I don't know if we covered this, but DP is density independent pixel. As a designer, most times the pixels you're operating with in Figma, or if you've done web development, they're called pixels like PX, but they actually are density independent because it's just simpler for us to not think about density. But in Android, if you use PX, it is the literal pixel on the screen. So it ends up being based on the resolution of the device, which can, for the to do the math is very confusing. So rather, it's better to think about things in DP. But the little trick is that for when we're offsetting things, like in the case of the slide in horizontal effect. So what is nice about slide in horizontally is you can say that, you can specify exactly how quickly that slide in happens. So in this case, we're going to use a tween with a 270 duration of milliseconds with linear easing. But we can actually specify the initial offset to, in this case, we're using -20. What that means is that when it slides in, it's going to start from -20 dp, so kind of towards the left, and then slide in. So because we're saying it's -20 and it's probably going to go to 0, it's actually going to go, it's going to start going from left to right. And then the opposite happens with slide out. So with slide out, you can actually specify what is the target offset that I want this to slide out to. And so we're actually specifically saying we want you to go to -20. So it's probably going to start at 0, which is often the default offset, and then go to -20. And so that will actually cause it to go from right to left, which is the effect we're looking for. And then fade out, these are specific timings from the spec. But back to the density thing. So the reason is offset is measured, takes input as pixels, not dps. So we have to do a bit of math to do that. So the way we do that here is we can write this little function that says with density, which I query the local density, which is whatever the density of the device is. I can say I want to go 20 dp and then just round to pixels. Using this is actually nice because as a designer, it's like, I don't want to have to do the math to figure out what the pixels are. I just care, like, I know it's supposed to move 20 dps. So make it do that. And so if we go back to the motion spec, that exact value of 20 is not in this spec. I think that's one of the gaps of it, but so I kind of guesstimated that. But you can see here, as it slides out, you can see Shrine is going from, the menu navigation icon is going from right to left and fading out. So that's where the 20 dp offset comes from. But the exact timings of the fade out animation come from the spec. So I can click here and say, I can click on this in Direct, which is a really nice tool. And here you can see, Shrine text and nav icon fade out. There's no delay. It's 120 milliseconds with linear easing. So it makes it easy for me to copy paste that directly into Compose code. And then this has other timings too. So the search Shrine text field is going to fade in with a delay of 120 milliseconds with 240 duration. Also linear easing. And it's probably kind of moving at that same 20 to 0 offset as well to slide in horizontally. And then, like I said, when we want the navigation icon, so the navigation icon slides out in this case because the backdrop is being revealed. When the backdrop's being closed, the menu icon slides back in, as you can see here. And so that's the -20 to 0 offset animation that we wanted to cover. So if we go back to the code, like I said, when the backdrop goes, when we want it to enter, when we want the menu navigation icon to enter, we want it to fade in, and we want to slide in horizontally from -20 to 0. And then when it exits, we want it to fade out and slide out horizontally from 0 to -20, which causes that right to left effect. So let's see if it actually works in code. And that might seem like a lot of code, but it actually isn't for the power of how you can do these animations. Prior to Compose, doing these animations required a lot more code. So this is actually a really nice declarative way to describe the animations. So here, I'll enter interactive mode just so we can see this in real time. So if I tap it, it slides out, slides in, slides out, slides in. And it seems a little janky compared to the other elements that are moving, but that's because we haven't hooked up the animation to the other elements yet. And so I'll kind of speed through this, but as I said before, you can use the animation inspector to really dial it in. So here, let me slow it down to 0.5. I'll loop it, and then, whoa. That's still too fast. Maybe 0.1 is good. Yeah, so here you can see it's sliding out as expected. I think this might not work. Yeah, this is a bug right now, unfortunately. But when you actually get to try this, we should fix this. But basically, the enter transition should be the opposite, where it slides back in, which it is not right now. But I think it's okay. It should work. But you can still see with exit that it slides out like this. So now let's actually go and apply more animation to the other elements. So we did it for the navigation for this menu icon. We need to do this for the diamond, and then we need to actually transition the shrine text to the text field, as you see here. So where is my shrine logo? So here's the shrine logo. Right now, the offset changes from 20 to 0 based on if the backdrop's revealed, but it is not animated at all. It just happens instantaneously. So the way I'm going to do that is here. So there's several ways to do this. You can use what we're going to use is called the update transition API. You don't have to use this. You can use, there's another API called animate float as state. If I go back to the guide, it's kind of said animate star as state. So this is a really handy API for if you want to animate if you want to animate values in a specific way. So you can animate floats, you can animate colors, DPs, size, offset, a bunch of things. And it's very straightforward. It's very powerful. If you want to animate just a single value from one value to another, and you can change the tween or the spring if you want to get the exact effect. The reason I'm not using it here is because I wanted to demonstrate how the animation inspector uses update transition, but in the future, we really hope to support animate star as state, because this is actually, I think a lot of people do use this API, so we hope to actually have support for it. In the meantime, though, we're going to use update transition. If we go back to Studio, so I'm going to go back and copy paste some code I had here. So let's explain what's going on here. So with update transition, the first thing you do is you create the transition itself. We're going to call it logo transition because we're going to move this diamond shape. The target state is, again, tied to the backdrop state. So in this case, the logo should move from 20 to 0 if the backdrop is shown, which is why I'm just passing it is backdrop revealed, which is set to true. Oh, I guess though we should look here, and I can explain to you exactly how this is working. Yes, I did forget that. That is an important piece of this puzzle. Where are we? Okay, so the backdrop, I think we covered this last time, but I'll show how it's hooked up to the top app bar. So the backdrop has a scaffold state, which shows whether the backdrop is concealed or revealed. I have a separate variable for backdrop revealed that it's separate because the reason is because if we use the scaffold state directly, there is a challenge where the animation isn't exactly what we want. I think I should probably quickly demonstrate that. I'll comment this out for now and we'll come back to it. Let's see. Yes. So here I'm telling the top app bar that the backdrop revealed parameter is from this Boolean. But you're probably wondering, well, why don't you just use the backdrop scaffold state directly? It's like, okay, I could do that. So let me try it. So I'll just say, you know what? Actually, this is just tied to the scaffold state dot is revealed. And so let's see what that results in. Probably have to build and refresh, actually. Come on. Okay. So now when I click this, oh, I think it's a little too fast. Let me see if I can slow it down. Oh, actually, it may not be demonstrated exactly how I planned. Let's slow it down. Oh, okay, yeah, this is not exactly what I want to show. I wonder... Doing this live is always fun. Actually, yes, there we go. So notice, when I tap this icon, the backdrop will reveal, but then this icon, which we hooked up before to the state of the backdrop revealing or not, the navigation icon, won't actually animate until the backdrop has reached its final destination. And you're like, wait, that's pretty janky. It is janky. The reason that is because the state, the scaffold state doesn't actually switch between is revealed or concealed until the animation is done. And that's problematic in this use case because for us, we want these things to animate as the backdrop is revealing itself. And so at the moment, I haven't really found an elegant way to do this with backdrop. It's something I want to discuss with the team because we do run into this challenge where the animations are kind of not timed well together. So what I have found is like, instead of doing that, I just use a is backdrop revealed. So if I undo this change and I just go back to using my own variable, the default state is at least what the backdrop starts at. But once, from that point on, basically this just toggles between true and false. If we go to the Shrine TopAppBar implementation, you can see there's a modifier on the entire TopAppBar that says it's a box and it's toggleable, and it basically toggles between whatever value backdrop revealed is. So if it's true, it will be false, and if it's false, it's true. And so if we rebuild the preview, and this should reverse the change that we had done. And I'm sure someone on this stream is probably going to tell me like, oh, there's a way better way to do this. And yeah, you'd probably be right. So here, yeah. So now when we do this, you can actually see the animations happening as the backdrop is being revealed, which is the effect we do want. There is a challenge that I run into later, but I've kind of worked around that. Well, we'll get to that at the very end, but it's not important. The important part is like, we want these animations to be timed together. And so that's the workaround I've done so far to make them time together. All right, so let's go back to animating more things. So we go back to the logo. Here, I just have to import a bunch of things. Okay. So we're using the update transition API. The target state is the value of backdrop revealed. We have a label. The label's important, as I'll show in a second. But what we're adding from this transition, which is really only one thing, is we're animating the DP. And the DP is the offset, and that's why I called it logo offset. So the way the transition works is you can kind of like, this is how you kind of append different parts of the transition together. So like this will fire off at the same time. You can also add other things. Like if you wanted to change the color, you could say, val logo color by logo transition dot animate color. And then this animate color will allow you to animate the color as part of the same transition as well. So it's actually, there's a lot of fine tuning you can do, because you can even change the animation spec depending on if it's what it's transitioning between. So in this case, I'm actually doing that. So I'm saying if the backdrop is being revealed, then use this duration and this easing. And then if the backdrop is being concealed, then use this opposite one. So that's the actual like speed or interpolation at which things change. But ultimately the logo offset is like, also has to say like, what are you going between? Are you going between 20 and 0? And that's what we're doing. So I already wrote that line of code here. And so I can just replace this now with logo offset. So now, what this means is that this value is going to be changing over time. And just by hooking up the way this transition works, you'll see the effect itself. So I'll build and refresh. All right. Let's chop, chop. Sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's not. Okay. So now I mentioned those labels. So the logo transition, the label, it's useful because actually as you use different animation APIs, if you don't set a label, we just call it what the API is called. But in this case, you can label it so you can see exactly which transition or animation this is applying to. So this is the logo transition. And so now you can see the diamond's moving too. And that's because that's what we set it up to do. And so we can loop it, slow it down. And so now you can kind of see they're both moving in concert together. And like, before, you can scrub it so you can go all the way here. What's cool about this as well is you can actually switch it so you can go the other way. So you can say, oh, actually, if you're going from revealing the backdrop to concealing it, what does that look like? And so you can see now the diamond is moving to the right here, which is the effect that we do want. But it's using a different tween. So the tween here is longer. It's 270 milliseconds versus when we reverse it, when it's exiting, it's a shorter tween, which is 120. You probably do notice though that this navigation icon, when I do switch the states, is not going in the right direction. That's the bug I was talking about, where it really should be exiting, or actually it really should be entering, but it's broken at the moment. Yeah, it's broken. But hopefully we'll get that fixed so they all look great together. We'll just switch that back so we can at least see this going together. Yep. Again, where did I get these values from? Like duration of 120, 270. This often was defined by the motion designer who built the shrine effects in general. So for the logo moving out, it's 120, and then for it moving back in, it's a little slower. I feel like I keep messing that up. Apologies. It's always challenging to talk through exit and exit transitions in repetition. But that's part of why this animation tool is great, because if you ever get confused at the time, you can just slow it down and just be like, wait, is this actually what I want? And so even though I've done this animation maybe 5 times now, every time I go back, I look at something and figure out, oh, actually, this is not exactly what the spec said. But it's great because this tool really allows me to see that, and I can work directly with a designer. I'm a designer, but if I was a developer and I had a motion designer, I could work directly with the person and say, hey, let's walk through this together, and is this exactly what you are looking for? And it kind of allows you to live code and tweak it and fine tune it with them in a way that's actually understandable. We can slow it down and they understand animation curves and tweens and springs and things like that. So I digress. Let's see, what do we want to do now? So we we've done the diamond and we've done the logo. So now we need to animate the shrine text and the text field. So that's the third part of the top app bar that has been driven by this is backdrop revealed. So it's a pretty crude transition. It just says if backdrop's revealed, it shows the text. If it doesn't, it shows the search field. So we want to animate that. If we go back to our animation spec, you can see it's a pretty sleek animation. So here, this is the backdrop concealing itself. So when it's concealing, the text field should animate to the right, and then the shrine text should animate to the right as well. So it kind of moves in one direction, which is really cool. And it's the opposite way too when we want the backdrop to be revealed, all the elements move to the left in kind of unison, which is, kind of the effect. It's kind of like this nice motion effect of going left to right, and then like the backdrop goes up and down. So how do we do that? So in this case, we actually have two elements that are swapping, versus before we had elements that were just moving on their own. They weren't actually changing. We were changing like a property of specific elements before. So like with the icon, we were changing the position and the opacity, the same. And with the diamond logo, we're just changing the position. But with the text and the search field, we're actually hiding one and revealing one, and then vice versa when it goes the opposite way. And so there's actually a different API for that, which I think is more suitable, and it's called animated content. And so I'm going to just copy paste this code because the animated content code is actually pretty complex just to walk through, but it's actually, I think it's still very readable. So I'll just collapse this just for now. So this is an experimental API. So if it is experimental, we need to add these annotations. We did this before with like the backdrop, which is an experimental material API. So you have to do this animated content because it's not quite stable yet, but it's very powerful. And then it's going to yell at me because you have to put this annotation kind of everywhere. Here we go. And then, yeah, like I said, everywhere. Okay. Now, let's go back to where we were. Okay. Actually, can I? No. I wonder if I want to word wrap this. Oh, can't remember how to do it. Anyway, it's okay. So animated content, kind of walking through that API. So it's similar to animated visibility. So there's a target state. Again, we're using backdrop revealed. So all of these things in the top app bar are driven by the state of whether the backdrop is revealed or not, which is great because all of these things kind of happen in unison. But with animated content, you can specify the transition spec. So this gets a little more complex than animated visibility because now that we are basically animating two things at the same time. We're transitioning one composable out and we're transitioning another one in. And then the reverse happens when the state changes. So I wrote these comments to help me talk through this. So what happens is if we are going from concealing the backdrop to revealing it, what we want to do is fade in and slide in the thing that's coming in, and then fade out and slide out the thing that's exiting. And the same happens with, oh, this is a little hard to read on the copy paste. I'll clean this up. And the same thing, if you squint at it, is happening on the exit. The difference, though, is the timings. And the difference is the offsets. So the two elements that we are transitioning, like I said, is the top app bar text and the menu search field. And so this is driven by if it's revealed, show this, and if it's not, show this. But like I said, I think I mentioned before, because we didn't use animated content, there was no animation. It kind of just swapped the two, and you didn't see a transition. By wrapping it in animated content, you actually get a really nice transition. Now, you don't have to specify transition spec. This is me heavily customizing the exact transition that I'm looking for, but it does come with some defaults. So by default, I think it's like a fade plus a scale, and then the thing that's exiting is a fade. And there's kind of different parameters to animated content that I won't cover in this, but it's very customizable, but it actually has some pretty great defaults if you don't customize the transition spec at all. But I wanted to do that because we're trying to get the exact effect that we're looking for. One of the important things that we actually do need to change is the content alignment. The reason we want to change it to center start is because if you don't change it to center start, I think the default ends up being top start, which is the top left corner. And that causes some really strange animations with slide in and slide out. Center start makes sure that it's centered and to the left or to the right, depending on your locale. But it makes sure that it lets us achieve this like very slick. You see how search the text shrine and then the text field are kind of moving on that same x-axis, or am I saying that? Y-axis. That's because of the content alignment. So that's what it makes sure it does, is that it's always moving along the center and start line, which is important for this specific transition we're doing. So all these values are from the design spec. So like, I think I mentioned before with slide in horizontally. And so what's cool about these effects is that you can use them in multiple APIs. So I used them in animated visibility. You can use them here in animated content. But the way you declare them is the same. It's just you can change the values. So in this case, when we're going from conceal to reveal, which is really this backdrop open, as I said before, everything is moving to the left that is exiting, and then things that are entering are also moving from the right to the left, because you can see the search field moving right to left. So if we go back to the code, that is what is happening. So the things that are fading in are going, they start at 30, which is more to the right, and they move to 0, which ends up making it go from right to left. And then the same thing with the things that are sliding out. So the target is negative 30. So by setting the target to negative 30, the animation framework knows, oh, you want to go from right to left, or from 0 to negative 30. And so that's why everything in the conceal to reveal, whether it's fading in or sliding, or whether it's sliding in or sliding out, they all move in the same direction. And it's the same with when we're going the reverse direction, which is reveal to conceal. So when we go from reveal to conceal, everything goes from left to right. I'll just go back to this design spec so you can see. So, when I play this, you can see everything goes from right to left. And I can really slow it down, see like everything's moving in the same direction when we're closing the back or concealing the backdrop, and then everything moves to the left when we're revealing it. So here everything's moving to the left when we reveal it, which is really, it's wild. I love it. So that is what's happening. And like I said, doing this, this code might look like a lot, but it actually isn't. It's pretty straightforward when you read it, because you're just specifying what the initial offsets are. And as we reviewed before, we do have to do a calculation with density because of the density independent pixel thing I mentioned before. And then the animation spec is just tweens. So these tweens are based off the design spec that I have. So you can totally mess with these. Tweens and springs are very powerful because this is where the animation inspector really comes into handy, because even if you read these values, it's hard to get a feeling for it. Like changing them just ever so slightly, especially easing, can dramatically change the look and feel of the animation, even though the duration looks exactly the same. And so having a tool like Animation Inspector is nice because, actually, let me rebuild this so we can see most of the code. Probably yell at me because, yeah, of course. The one thing I will say, though, is animated content is not fully supported by the Animation Inspector yet. It does show up in the tool, and it does play, but there are some bugs with it, and it's not fully supported yet, so we are working on that. But for the purposes of this demo, it works, and you can kind of see how things move in unison. Yeah, there we go. So it's going really slow, but now you can see everything moves from right to left, at least for when we are concealing the backdrop. The other thing you'll notice is that you're like, well, why is the backdrop not revealing or concealing? The reason is because we don't have that animation detected by the tool yet. So that is one of the downsides at the moment, is like if you have a built-in animation in the material components, we don't pick that up right now. but we hope to do that in the future. It's not that it doesn't work on device, or when I played an interactive preview, it actually does work. So I'll play it here. Oh, yeah, it's a little janky with the frame rate, but you can see that when I click this, things move together like so. So it does work. I think the other thing we'll do, and now it's going to get bold, is let me try to deploy this to device so you can see the full effect of this. 1 sec. I just need to set up my phone for wireless debugging. Okay. So now, let's see. This is a newish feature in Android Studio. Allows you to actually wirelessly deploy to your device, which is great because you don't have to carry on cables anymore, as long as you're on the same Wi-Fi network. In this case, I have a Google 6 Pro here next to me, a Pixel 6 Pro. So I'm going to deploy the app, which should deploy this whole backdrop here. So let me try to run it. Oh, actually, I think y'all can't see it. So let me just do that. Okay. I'm using this handy utility called Screen Copy. I don't know if I ever get that name right. But it's mirroring my phone wirelessly, which is cool. It just works with wireless ADB. So I deployed that composable. So now when I click this, the animations are way smoother on device. I would say whenever you're testing animation, like the animation inspector is great for fine tuning, but do always test on device because the performance is going to be much better or much worse depending on the specs of the device. And ultimately, that's where the app ends up at the end of the day. So it's always important to test it on device, especially as you start to hook up animations that have gestures. But yeah, it actually looks great. This is the kind of effect that we're looking for. Cool. All right. So I'll stop that. Get rid of screen copy for now. So I think the last thing we want to do is animate the navigation items. These guys here. As I said, what happens is they kind of fade in as the backdrop is being revealed, and they stagger in, which is cool. So how do we create that staggered effect? Well, it's actually not that complicated. All right. So what are we going to do? So the first thing, let's go find. We're done with the top app bar. So I'm just going to hide. Oh, not set a breakpoint. I'm going to hide that for now. I've refactored the code a bit from, I didn't show this in part 2, but this is in the completed code in part 2. The reason I did this is this will make this exercise that we're doing much easier. So for the navigation menu, which is this component, actually we have a preview of it. It's these, in this case, we have 4 categories. We have a divider and we have a logout. The categories are a data class that I included in here. You can look at it in data. It's just called categories. This is going to be reused in many places, but for now we're just going to use it for the backdrop menu. So what happens is the navigation menu, as we I think covered last time, there's an active category and then there's an event for selecting the menu. But what we also need now is we need to be aware of when the backdrop is being revealed and concealed. So for the navigation menu, I'll add that. I'll say backdrop revealed Boolean. And for now, I'll set it to true, because if I don't set it to true, then the preview is going to hide these things when we add animated visibility. And then let's see, update usages. Yes. Oh wait, that is not what I wanted to do. I think what we can do is the default set to true, but we want to hook it up to the backdrop itself. So the backdrop, that's the top app bar. This is the front layer. The back layer is where the menu is. So it's set to true, but we want to actually dynamically make it happen. So with navigation menu, I'll add it here. So the backdrop revealed is just going to be tied to the backdrop revealed state that we mentioned before, which is driving everything in the app bar and in the front. Oh, it's not controlling the front layer quite yet, but it will in the future episodes. And it's driving things in the back layer. So it's a really important value that is being used and helping basically recompose a lot of the pieces of the app. So for navigation menu, we now know what backdrop revealed is. Why is it still giving me this? Oh, no, I don't want to do that. I don't know why it's giving me that advice. It's bad advice. So like I said, we have these 4 categories. We have the divider and we have the logout. I've put those things in this menu item composable. And so the menu item composable is a box that fills the max width. It has a nice clip for the shape, and then aligns things to the center, and then it uses a content slot. This is useful because you can kind of have, as you can see, it's like I can wrap these things in the same thing, and depending on what content I want. So sometimes it's actually a category, sometimes it's a divider, sometimes it's a logout, but it allows me to kind of use these the content parameter as a slot, so I can get a consistent look and feel in the menu. And I think I covered the slot-based approach last episode, so I'm reusing it here, and you'll see why it's actually an important approach to use when we add animation. So here we have a column, and everything, these menu items are vertically spaced by 8 dp. So what I want to do is I want to animate all the menu items. So I can just start out by adding animated visibility. And animated visibility, again, like we want to show these menus when the backdrop's revealed. So we're going to tie it to the state of backdrop revealed. We're going to move this code into the animated visibility block. I'll just expand this. Oh, whoa, not what I wanted. All right, so we're going to add it there, and we're going to see what happens. All right, come on, cool. So if we enter interactive mode, so you can kind of see it slides in. It's really hard to see because the timings are, I haven't customized the enter and exit transitions for animated visibility for this specific part. We go back to the animation tool. This is the new one we just introduced. So if I slow it down, actually the one thing I will do, so I did mention before that what's tricky is we don't detect that the backdrop animation is executed in this animation inspector. So for the purposes of this specific part of the stream, I'm going to change the state of the backdrop, the default state, to revealed. And the other thing I'm going to do is, if you remember, I hooked up that event where when you click that top left corner in the top app bar, it will reveal or conceal the backdrop. For the purpose of this, I'm just going to comment that code out. And the reason, oh, actually, I will just comment out the actual code that changes the scaffold state, but not the backdrop revealed, because we do need that. So this is just for debugging purposes. I hope at a future date, if it does pick up the backdrop state more clearly, then you won't have to do this. Nice part though is Compose is pretty flexible, so like this stuff can be kind of used temporarily and then removed when you actually commit your code. So here, now the backdrop is revealed by default, but yeah, and so yes, so you can see if we slow it down, it's interesting actually because it's the exit transition, but the exit transition by default for animated visibility is this kind of fade and slide out. That's just why it looks like it's doing that. That's not the effect we want. The effect we want is we want them to, at least on the exit, fade out all at the same time, and then on the enter, fade in. Let's see. Actually, I wonder if I set this to enter. Oh. Yeah, this isn't working exactly, but I'll get back to this because I think this will work better once we actually hook up this code properly. So, you could animate the whole menu if you want, but we actually really want to dial it and animate every element in a staggered way. So how do we do that? We can still use animated visibility, but what we can do at the top level is actually say, the enter transition should be nothing. And then the exit transition should also be nothing. And you're probably like, what? And then the label is, we'll name it menu, we'll just call it navigation, nav menu transition, just so it's nicely labeled. So now because I set it to none, there's not going to be any transition. And you're like, well, that's not what you want. Well, the reason you do that is because we actually want to animate it per item. How do we do that? So what we can do is, because we've refactored each of these menu items into this menu item composable, I can add a modifier here called animate enter exit. It's going to yell at me because it's not there. The reason is because you can only do this within an animated visibility scope, meaning you can only do this when this element is within an animated visibility block. And so it's going to say, oh, you need to add the experimental animation API, of course. But what this does is this now allows me to customize the animation per menu item. And so I'm going to do that. And let's see, where's the menu item? Here we go. And so this is the exact timing I'm going to use. No. So on enter, it's going to fade in. But to stagger it, we can actually use delay. And we can delay it by, according to the spec, if we go back to the spec, it's about 15 milliseconds, because you can see it starts at 60, and then the next one starts at 75, and the next one starts at 90. So they're all 15 milliseconds apart, starting at 60. And that's the math that I added to this delay. So I said, you know what? First start at 60, and then multiply it by the index. So the index is in red right now. I have to add index here. Int. Yeah. The reason I pass index is so if we go back to menu items, that index is used to figure out which item it is in the list. And so for the first 4, which are all categories, let me add this experimental animation API annotation. For the first 4, they're all categories. And so I can pass the index based on the index that's already being used in this for loop category values. So I can say, oh, you know what? The index is just IDX. But then it's like, wait, what about the other 2? And so it's like, okay, what I can do is I'll just put this in its own variable for now. I'll just say val categories. Come on, you can spell, Chris. Equals this. And I'll just say, for each categories, for each index, it will loop through the categories. But then for the other menu items, the index can just be, the categories dot size. So this means it's like the next one after, and then this one equals categories dot size plus 1. So in this case, we have 4 categories. So this will be, it's 0 based, of course. So it's 0, 1, 2, 3 for the first 4. Then this one will be number 4, which is the divider. And then number 5 is the logout. So, and then there's one little error here. Yes. Add those experimental annotations everywhere. We'll build and refresh. Come on. All right. So now, this isn't exact. Anyway, I'll get into that in just a second. So now if we play, it all fades out at the same time. The reason it does that is because that's actually the exit transition that I had specified. Where did it go? I should really space this file or refactor this code into smaller files. Yes, so on the exit, it's not staggering. We're actually, all of them fade out at the same time. But when we want them to enter, they all stagger. So it's disappointing I can't see that here. But I think what I'll do, we can see it in interactive preview. So, yeah, the backdrop thing's a little weird. But if I click this, then you'll see them kind of. Oh, I messed something up, didn't I? I think I did. No, that's correct. Let me. If I uncomment this code, no. Rebuild. Let me just double check that I wrote all this correctly. Modifier. Yeah, this looks right. Backdrop revealed. Yep. Yep. Okay. All right, we'll enter interactive mode. There we go. So you can kind of see it fade in. Actually, I wish the animation tools worked because you can really slow it down. I wonder why it didn't work. I'll deploy to device. I'm going to screen copy this again so you can see it. There we go. Okay. So now, boom. Yes, this is really smooth. But you can see the animation. Actually what I'll do, because the animation tooling isn't working quite as expected, let me slow it down so you can really see the dramatic effect that it has. And it's cool because this is all animation code. So right now, that delay is 15 milliseconds, but I can change it to a whole second. And if I do that, redeploy the app. Doing a little build. It's a very slow animation. Now when I click this, it should fade them in very slowly. Yep. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm being very dramatic with the stagger, but that just demonstrates to you that it is working. So 15 milliseconds is pretty fast. That's according to the motion spec. Maybe 150 is not as fast and not as slow. So let's see if we can get that going. Here we go. Yeah, that kind of demonstrates the staggering. And then, like I said, when you fade out, we have no stagger, so they just go away. And now I've run into this bug that I mentioned before. There's one bug which you'll run into is sometimes if you click that button too quickly, because I'm managing the states of the backdrop in different ways, it gets confused and there's a race condition. So to fix that race condition, this is what I did. So if you say, if the backdrop is if an animation is running, which means it's not, the state hasn't quite changed. So if it's not running, is this right? Yeah. So what this means is like every time someone taps it, because it is a clickable event, if an animation's running, then like don't interfere with it. Just let it finish. But if it is finished, then you know you can run it. So if we try to redeploy that again to the device. Yes, here we go. Yeah, so it has that silly staggering, but you see here, I can't get into a state where I break it if I try to like tap it multiple times, which is, it's a nice addition to work around that issue. But yeah, and this is a text field. See, you can type in it, which is funny. Yeah, let's see. And there we go. And, you know, we had that category thing transitioning before. So if we click accessories, it should fade out and then do that. And now accessories is still there. Oh, yeah, wait, let me, yeah. So that is very, it actually is slower the more you do it. And 15 actually feels right, at least according to the spec. If you don't believe me, like again, I think there's the spec here. Yeah, there's a 240 duration for each one, and then it's a linear easing with that delay depending on multiples of 15 with a base of 60. So if we go back to our app, now it feels much more snappy, which is exactly what the spec kind of looks at. So yeah, this turned out really well. And if if we go back to here, play it at 1x speed, it may not look exactly the same, but it's getting there. This seems a little snappier, to be honest, and so this is why I was saying before, I've often revisited this many times and been like, is it snappy enough? Because this spec seems to make it feel way more snappy. So this is something you could kind of work together with the designer to really fine tune. I didn't do that with the designer here, but at some point I'll talk to him and figure out, like, did I actually get these timings right? But having a spec tool like this is really useful, but then having that inspection tool in Studio is even nicer because you can really slow things down as you work with your developer or designer, like I said, vice versa, to fine tune this stuff. Oh, yeah, see this. It's funny, like sometimes this stuff works and sometimes it doesn't. We still have some bugs, but you can see here now it's actually staggering the animations. All right, so that concludes the third episode. We covered the basics of how to do animation and compose with the backdrop using a few of the APIs and the animation inspector. There are a couple other cool animations in Trine that we will cover next time, so stay tuned. Make sure to look in the description for the link to GitHub repo, which includes the completed code from today's stream, as well as helpful links to learn more about Jetpack Compose and material design. And if you found this video helpful, let us know in the comments, as we're looking forward to doing these kinds of streams in the future. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss an episode.